Good morning. So I am Ro, and as you can see, I have a special guest with me. I'm super excited to have Krisa Winn on Ro's Resource Room today. And before I allow Krista to introduce herself, I just wanted to share that this is actually her first time meeting in person, virtually, just first time meeting at all, but she has been such a tremendous benefit to my personal homeschool journey. I would talk to her on the phone and then send her 2,000 follow-up emails like, so based on our question, I have 21 more questions. And she has just been so gracious and so phenomenal and instrumental in my journey. So I just wanted to share her with you so that she can talk about her journey. So Krista, welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, thank you, Ro. So, my experience is I've been in education most of my adult life. So I went to college to become a classroom teacher, and then I did that for about 20 years. Um, I got married really young. I was only 19 when I got married, and I think we're going to celebrate our 38th wedding anniversary this summer, so you can
Wow.
do the math, but maybe 39. It's getting up there, right?
It's
So,
close to 40.
but we were not able to have children for um well, our daughter was born, and then we had our 21st wedding anniversary right after. So more than 20 years I waited to become a mom.
Wow.
And so during that time I was a classroom teacher. I started off in private school and then spent the majority of my career in public school. I taught lots of different grade levels and got lots of different experiences. And what was interesting looking back is that, and my husband and I moved a lot too, just kind of moving to the next best opportunity. And we didn't have children. And so we just did that. But everywhere we lived, even on the campus of Arkansas State University in Jonesboro, Arkansas, we were living in a 10 by 40-foot trailer. And a few trailers down from us on married housing, there was a family crazy in the 80s. They were homeschooling their kids, you know?
Wow.
And so everywhere we lived and moved, I met people that were homeschooling. So even though I was a public school teacher, I had a great respect for people that homeschooled. I didn't really know that much about it, but I was like, more power to you. Awesome, so that's
Right.
great. And then many years later, we moved to a small town in North Carolina, Burnsville, North Carolina, and I met people that were homeschooling through high school. Like they had high schoolers. I'd never heard of that. I didn't think you could
Right.
do that. So it was really interesting how God kind of prepared me to eventually leave the classroom when I had my second child. The Lord made it very clear that I needed to be home. And my
Mm.
husband, I talked to him, I'm like, Byron, I think I've got to be home with our babies. And he said, you've been teaching everybody else's kids for 20 years. It's time to start teaching our own. And I was
I
like,
love
okay.
it.
So I stepped away from the classroom and stayed home. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have a plan. It was all pretty abrupt. And the Lord opened up an opportunity for me to work for Homeschool Legal Defense Association as an educational consultant. And so I've been doing that for 12 years. And that's how I met you,
Right.
sort of, by the phone. And so it's really, I just feel like it's such a unique opportunity where God took all of my experiences in the classroom and also all of my experiences of having met homeschool families along the way in lots of different stages and ages, and then pulled all of that together so that I could then share, my knowledge. And it was a working knowledge, I mean, like
Yeah.
I'm always learning, but to be able to share those experiences with others. And I did homeschool my girls for 7 years. We homeschooled, and then I began working full time. And they're in private school, right? A really small private school that's a ministry of our church right now. But but still homeschooling is always my heart, and I love it. Yeah.
That's so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Like, whenever I hear of a public school teacher who's homeschooling, I'm like, okay, I'm doing something right. Because if you're in the system and you're coming out of the system, there must be a reason. But I also think it's so interesting and beautiful how God prepared you for the journey. He showed you snippets every move, like, hey, see that over there? Keep that in the back of your mind. Hey, see,
Mhm.
that's possible, right? And then my question to you is, when you first felt that nudge, were you one of those people who are like, yes, Lord, I will do it, or were you like, blah blah blah, Lord, I'm not, that's not you. Like, were you immediately like, Byron, I think this is what the Lord is telling me, or did you have to like wrestle with it for a while? What did that look like?
Well, I'll answer that question, but I always like to tell this story. I think it's hilarious, because I graduated from a Christian school. My husband was a public school graduate, and one of our very first knockdown newlywed arguments was how we were going to educate our kids.
Wow.
And so, I can recall that. And I'm like, our kids are going to go to Christian school. And he said, I went to public, he's from Arkansas. So I always do his little
His
Southern drawl. He's
accent.
like, our kid, I went to public school. Our kids are going to be, going to public school. And then when I became a public school teacher after many years, he was like, our kids are going to be homeschooled. Like, he was
Complete
there.
360.
So there was we had a positive bent towards homeschooling, but
Mhm.
honestly, as I began it, I did have some fears. And the fear was not really, oh, I won't be able to offer a quality education. I wasn't worried about that, but I think my fear was the balancing of it all. How can I be mom? And I was going to have to work, and was very worried about money a lot, and so I think I had external fears about how I was going to actually do it, but not too concerned about the rationale behind it, or even that I relished the idea of directing their education. It wasn't that, but just the external parts. Like my friend Vicky has a workshop that she does, how to homeschool your kids and get dinner on the table at the same time. It was
Yeah.
that sort of, those were my fears. Yeah.
And I appreciate you for sharing that because we know where there's those fears come from. So you had the physical education of being able to teach children, right? So the enemy knew he couldn't attack you there. Like, I did everyone else's
Mm.
kid. I'm sure I could do mine, right? So he's
Hmm.
like, how can I get Krista? How can I get her to not accept this call that she
Mm.
believes that she received from God, right? So it's like, well, we can talk about money. And we know God is not going to forsake us and have us begging for bread, right? We know that's
Right.
not the case. The same way he opened up doors and possibilities for you to move and for you to be able to homeschool, we know he's going to provide because where there's a vision, there's also provision, right? And we know that in the back of our heads, but yet we still allow these fears to come in and the enemy, that serpent in the Garden of Eden, to come in and say, but you're not going to have enough money. You're going to be eating
Yeah.
noodles all your life, you know?
Yes. And I could tell you, Rose, so many times how God just provided for us so beautifully. Um, Initially, I did what I called a homeschool, kind of like a trial homeschool when my daughter was in preschool. So she went to a preschool program like twice a week, but then the other days I kind of ran my homeschool preschool. So I kind of that was my first like step into the water. But then when we started kindergarten, I really wanted to have a community to
Mhm.
homeschool with. And there wasn't anything in my community that was a fit for our family and where my children were at the time. And God just orchestrated a run-in with a mom that I had met a few times, and I thought she homeschooled, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah,
And so we had a, chance encounter. It wasn't, it was a divine
right.
appointment. And I just went up to her and I'm like, hey, don't you homeschool? And she was like, yeah, I do. And I'm like, well, I'm, starting and I really want a co-op or something. But I don't know of anything. She's like, I've been praying for a co-op. And so we
Aw.
joined forces, and then just the two of us saying we're going to organize something. Before we knew it, we had like 5 families, and we just started a little rotation, and it was such a blessing. So like that was one thing, like a need I was concerned about, and God met it. I remember first grade, I loved the idea of Sunlight curriculum, but
Yes,
I couldn't afford Sunlight curriculum. I was like,
I hear
what am I
you.
going to do for curriculum? And again, another homeschool mom just reached out to me. She was like, I was like, I just love Sunlight, but I just can't afford it. She's like, we just finished Sunlight first grade, the first grade level, whatever box that was. And she's like, I won't need it for 2 more years. Do you want to use it this year? Like, so she gave me the
Wow.
entire set to use. And I mean, there was just things like that over and over again that God just so beautifully provided for us. And it was a really sweet time.
And I hope you share this story every single opportunity you can. I know HSLDA gives out these compassion grants and they give out funding and scholarships and all these things. But like even in your own personal time when you're not with HSLDA,
Mm.
I really hope you share these stories because we don't always see the other side, right? Like sometimes we give up too quickly, sometimes we're not consistent. But when we're faithful and we see the other side of God, you put this desire in my heart to want to use Sunlight. It's so beautifully prepared, but it's just not in the budget. And someone where someone would say out of nowhere, but someone you connected me with said, what are the chances that I have what you need? That's all God, right? So
Yes.
I really hope you share that story every single time. And I love the part of you creating a co-op. It's like, I'm looking for it. It doesn't exist. I guess I just have to build it. I love that.
Yes. Yeah, sometimes you have to do it. And I didn't know what I was doing. And that kind of changed over time, that we got a little bit more formal as the years went on. And I actually moved from that area 6 years ago, but that co-op is still in existence and going strong,
Wow.
which is really neat.
That's
Um,
legacy. I love
yeah,
it.
it's really special. But yes, I do share that story, that story and others. I try to share that a lot, and I try to tell other homeschool moms 2 things, and you kind of hit on it. Number one is sometimes when we have a need, we have to make ourselves vulnerable. And I mean, God has met needs in my life that I didn't utter a word to
Yeah.
anyone about. And I
Yeah.
love those. Those are awesome. But sometimes people want to help, but they don't know how to help if we don't tell
Share.
them and
Yeah.
share it. And so sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you just have to ask, hey, do you have a scholarship? Hey, do you have a discount? Hey, you have to ask
Yeah.
these things. And then the other thing was about the co-ops. If you don't find what you're looking for, maybe you're the one that needs to just start it. And there's nothing wrong with starting small,
Right.
and you never know where it's going to go from there.
Yeah, and even staying small, like if it's just those families who need it, that's okay. Like everything is not meant to be 100 or 1,000 people, right? Like
Right.
sometimes, I mean, especially if you live in a small town, you probably don't have that many people,
Mhm.
right? But everything is not meant to be that. That's not what determines a success. It's not the size of it. But you mentioned something that I cannot gloss over. The second thing that you talked about was balancing it all.
Mm,
And this was years ago, but today it's still a question for so many women, so many moms, so
mhm,
many people. How do I balance it all? Is it possible to have it all? And I really want to hear like your introspection from that time, how you were able to navigate or simplify things if you were able to. Because I remember talking to my husband and I said, my concern is I have my hands in so many different things, and so many of them bring me passion and they're so fulfilling. My biggest concern is I don't want to be the person who does everything but does nothing well,
mm,
right? Like I don't want
mhm,
to be on here recording a podcast and it's haphazard. I don't want to have dinner half made. I don't want the house to be, filled with clutter and look like just like a hot mess because I'm doing too many things. So like what does it
mhm,
look like to create that harmony and put first things first and create priority and really depend on God. Like when you think of Mary and Martha, I'm like, Martha, I understand you. I know it's important to sit at Jesus' feet, but the food has to get made. I understand, right? But then the Mary part is so beautiful too. Like if I do sit and I have the devotion, maybe he'll give me that divine wisdom of how to navigate it all. So what has been your thought or your experience on the quote unquote balance in it all.
Yeah. Well, and first of all, I don't think it ever gets really any easier. Some people might have more giftings in that than others, but just for an average person like myself, um, I mean, one of the things that has really helped me is just understanding that I don't have to do it all. I'm a
Mm,
servant and I love to serve. And yet sometimes, again, I was talking about being vulnerable when you have, a financial need or some other need. Sometimes I need to step out of that. I want to do this. This is how I demonstrate love, to
yes.
say, hey, I think you could do this. And especially when my children were younger, I didn't really um want them to do things, or even my husband. It didn't, I could probably clean the bathroom better than he could, or I could do the kitchen better than he could. But I think just delegating what um what others could do for me. That's one thing. The other thing is just prioritizing. There are things that I enjoy doing and then things that I just want to do. And I think I'm not a list maker. I do enjoy a list, but I'm not one of those persons that lives by a list. But
Mhm.
when I do write things out and then step out and look at it and go, what really has to be done today? And what could I do another day? That really helped a lot. And then I think there's just sometimes the balance is it's not maybe even as bad as we think it is, but just mentally we're taking on a lot of stress.
Yeah.
And so I remember homeschooling and working, that I really had to get into the mindset that was a peaceful mindset. Like,
Mm,
and I often tell this story. I remember when my firstborn came into the world and I'm still in the hospital with her, we are trying to nurse, and this beautiful Jamaican nurse came in and she said, "Oh, mama, you need to relax. Your baby gonna pick up on all your emotions. You need to relax." And I've thought about that when I was homeschooling and working at the same time, that I set the tone. And
mm,
like if I had a looming project or a newsletter I needed to get out or something that had to be done, I would usually homeschool in the mornings and then the afternoons was my work time. Um, but if I had a deadline like that, I would kind of go into the day like, we gotta hurry, we gotta get this done. And I
yeah,
was just creating all of this stress, and really, I didn't need to do that because that was not my time to do my work,
yeah,
And I needed to understand that 5-year-olds preferred to do nature study outside instead of, my math lesson that I had, and my
I hear you.
2-year-old's gonna cry, and I just need to accept reality and
Mm,
put that off. Things that I didn't need to worry about, I don't need to worry about, and just kind of designate in my mind so that that just helped me to balance emotionally, because I think sometimes it's more mentally that we're putting on ourselves than what's really even external. If I hope that makes sense, but
you hope
yeah.
that makes sense. Oh my gosh, you need to have your own podcast. This this is so amazing because there's so many nuggets in what you just said. Like the first thing that I heard was you don't have to do it all. And if we can really step back, that is so refreshing. It is so reassuring to understand, okay, you have this list and half of the things are probably not important. The other quarter probably unrealistic, and then the last quarter is probably what really needs to get done, right? But what
Mhm.
you're talking about is what can be delegated? What can you completely just remove from the list? What can be completely eliminated? What are
Mhm.
the priorities? If you get these three things done, will you feel that euphoric feeling of I accomplished something? What really needs to be done? And I remember there was a time when I was feeling so overwhelmed. I was living in New Jersey, working in New York City, which could be an hour to an hour and a half, depending whether I took one bus or three trains.
Mhm.
And I had two babies. They're probably 3 and 1, or very, very young. Both were under the age of 4. And I was
Mhm.
volunteering in my church, and I had like all these things going on. Again, things that fulfill me, things that I wanted to do, things that I enjoyed. But I was feeling overwhelmed because you're still the domestic goddess. You have the cooking, the cleaning, all these different things. And I'm like, oh, all I have to do is partner with my partner. So I went to my husband and I said, babe, I just wrote a list. I have 17 things that I need to do today. Can you put your name beside the ones that you want to do? And then I gave him the paper. And then I don't know, maybe he wrote his name beside like one or two. And I'm like, babe, there's 17 things. You wrote your name on like one or two. He said, you need to do it today, right? And I said, yeah. He said, I can't do all those things today. And I said, okay,
Mm,
well, what about tomorrow? And he goes, bro, you made the list.
mm,
And it was such a mindset shift that the stress that I was feeling was self-inflicted. Does the
mhm,
bathroom need to be clean? 100%. Does it need to be cleaned right now? Maybe not. You know,
mhm,
like there's some things that are priority, like you're saying. You have
mhm.
to do that today. If you have a newborn, you have to feed the baby, right?
Right,
There's
right.
some things that are, definitely a must, definitely a priority, definitely today, definitely now. But there are other things where if it's been on the list for 2 years, I'm pretty sure it doesn't have to get
It can
done.
wait another day or
It can wait
four.
another day, right? And even that, yeah. So that was just a gem. That mental stress, those unrealistic expectations, it's really a mindset shift of what really matters, right? And then
Mhm,
setting the tone, like it made me think of, are we as moms and wives the thermostat or the thermometer, right? Are we going in and just like blazing through and just creating all this chaos, or are we the safe haven? Are we the peace? When we
mhm,
go in, are we setting the atmosphere, right?
mhm,
And when you said that in terms of like, feeling harried or stressed because you have something, it made me think of one of the benefits of home-centered education is leaning into the flexibility. So
mhm,
right now we're meeting at 10. Normally I would say between 9 and 12, I would do home-centered education. But this morning I had a meeting at 9:30. I have you at 10, I have another person at 11. So my
mhm.
boys and I started at 8 and we got the core things done. So if I don't get anything else done for the day, I am okay.
You're good. Uh-huh.
We have a community that we're going to visit at 1 p.m. So, like lean into the flexibility. It
Mhm,
doesn't have to be a routine where 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 8:15, 9:15, but there's a structure. Every day I'm doing these core things. Every other day I'm doing the language or the instrument or the whatever. But
mhm.
you're just dropping so many gems and I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. So good. I'm glad. I'm glad.
So talk to me more about like how did your children, I guess because they were homeschooled since basically birth,
Baby, yeah.
it was their norm, right? Like there was nothing else to
It
compare
was
it to.
their norm. It was, yes. And and but I laugh because um both my girls, I don't laugh about this, but I have this ideal picture, especially being around like these amazing women that I worked with that have from HSLDA that have had all this experience and all these beautiful stories about homeschooling. You kind of have this ideal set in your mind of what your students are going to be like. Well, mine were like, I had a coworker that she's like, "Oh, my kids woke me up again wanting to do math." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, no,
Not my experience.
not my house. That's not what happens here." So they just were like, they loved to play, they loved imagination, which I really nurtured that when they were younger. And they also like to ask a lot of questions that were off topic, which, I eventually learned that that's really important because I needed to nurture their curiosity. But I kind of had to come to this place where I realized that my kids weren't that enthusiastic about coming and doing, an English lesson or a math lesson. And believe me, I did try to make it fun. But one time we were at the library and my daughter was like, "Mom, I want to check out a video. I want to check out a video." I'm like, "Great, educator, homeschool advocate, helping moms homeschool their kids." And I take my children to the library and they only want to watch video, check out videos. And so I had to kind of just roll with that. And I learned from that. And but yeah, it wasn't always dreamy for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, it wasn't always easy.
And
So
that's the thing because we look at, again, it's the unrealistic expectations that what works for the Joneses family is supposed to work for your family, realizing that God gave us unique children, right? Like we all have individual situations, we all have different personalities and characters, and we all have a different thing that we're called to do. So maybe one person wants to play their guitar all day, and that's because eventually they'll be in the the band or something, but
Mhm.
not everyone is going to have that same thing. So it makes me think about just leaning into loving the child that we have, not the one that we wish we did. Right?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
yeah.
Yes. And I remember too, coming to a realization that my 6 or 7 year old or my, 8 year old or even my 10 year old didn't have the same mindset that I had.
Hmm.
Like I had, I just had, this expectation of what I wanted. And sometimes I thought that they could read my mind and understand why I was asking them to do a certain thing, or that I don't know if I can exactly communicate what I'm trying to say, but I just learned so much while we were homeschooling, the importance of actually having conversation with your kids
Yeah.
and not assume that I know why they reacted a certain way or why they said a certain thing, but to really talk to them and find out what was going on in their
Right.
minds. And not even on just an emotional or an engagement kind of level, but even education wise. And we're getting close to end of time here, but I just remember a time when I was working with my daughter in math. It was like the first day of second grade, or maybe the first day of first grade. We were reviewing math facts, and I was using vertical flashcards,
Hmm.
and she was giving me the craziest answers. And I'm like writing down notes, review math facts. Like I'm like, oh my goodness, what has happened? And I just stopped myself and I said, tell me why you gave me that answer. Well, we had done a math program that had very little written work. I had never presented a math fact to her vertically. It was always horizontally. And
Hmm.
she didn't know what that line on the bottom, the equal sign, like
Yeah.
it's 4 plus
And then
2
the
and then the
line.
line. She didn't know what that was. And she thought it was the subtraction symbol. So she was adding and then just trying to guess what it was that mom wanted her to subtract from that. And that's why she was giving me all these wild answers. But, I was interpreting that as she doesn't know any of her
Yeah.
math facts, we got to
Yeah.
review. But that wasn't it at all. So I just really, homeschooling gives you the opportunity to talk to your kids,
It does.
not only on a relational level, but also education level, so that
Hmm.
you can really focus on what's important.
Yeah, that's really important because that simple tweak, just by you asking the question, saved you from having to spend an hour, 2 hours trying to figure out what happened, or even thinking, oh my gosh, all the work that I did, she forgot, she doesn't know it. I have to,
Yes,
restart the whole
or
program
forcing her to review math facts when she really didn't
when
know.
she
She
knew it.
knew her math
Yeah,
facts. She just didn't know it in that presentation.
right. And
So,
even the communication helps with character building, right? Because say, for example, it was something that needed to be nurtured. That conversation would lead to a teachable moment where we're like, hey, I know you'd rather be outside playing with worms, but in this moment, this is what's important, right? So it leads to character building. And I think the moment that we stop seeing our children as just students and minds to educate, like, oh, here are the kids that I need to educate versus the children you're doing life with, the children God has given you on assignment. I think once we make that mindset shift, things will start to flow and we'll start to experience a little bit more harmony.
yeah, it's a beautiful way of putting it, Ro. It really is. And it's true. Very true. Yeah.
Thank you. So before we started recording, you were telling me about some tips that you wrote like way
Oh,
back. Feel free to share like anything else that you want to share.
well, yeah, I was telling you that about 10 years ago, I wrote benefits of homeschooling,
Hmm.
um, coming from a public school teacher. So I'll just I won't go all over all 10 of them, but I just remember being so excited that as I organized my classroom, I was actually organizing my house, which was a nice perk. That was great. Um, I actually took time to plan. It seemed like as a classroom teacher, we had what were called preschool days where we were in service, and a lot of the in-service didn't apply to even our situation sometimes, or things that we already knew, or it was blood pathogen training that we had to do every single year, those kinds of things. And planning seemed to be an afterthought. Whereas when
Hmm.
I took on that responsibility of deciding for myself what materials I wanted to use. I really saw a shift in what I did. As a classroom teacher, a committee had already decided this is your reading curriculum, this is your math curriculum. I had to figure out how to use it myself, but I got to decide that.
Yeah.
I also wrote down like a benefit was field trips with no paperwork. Like my last 5 years in the classroom, we didn't even get to go on field trips for what I don't even know what the reason was, but we didn't. They just cut it out. And which made me sad. But I also recall field trips, as much as I loved giving those experiences to my students, were like horrific for me because I'm constantly counting everybody, and there was all this paperwork I had to sign. I had to justify why I thought the field trip was an educational experience, and all of that was gone with homeschooling.
Yeah.
I loved that I had a roster of 2 instead of my last experience in the classroom was AM kindergarten and PM kindergarten. So I had
Mhm.
like 43 students in all that I needed to get to know. And so I wrote down, I have a roster of 2 and already know everything, or at least most everything about them, so always learning more about them, obviously. Um, Nice perk, I could go to the bathroom anytime I wanted to. That's nice.
Yes.
Um, and then let's see, a couple other ones. I think the other was story time on my couch. When I taught my kindergartners in the classroom sitting, they would go, "Oh, read that again." And I would say, well, we can't, we have PE, or we have to start math, or and so with my girls, I could just read stories over and over. That's our cherished moments. We still talk about some books that we read, 10 years ago. Um, and then my last thing was freedom. And
Mm,
I'll read, to be honest, I've been worried about homeschooling. I've not been worried about teaching. I knew that would fall in place. It was balancing it all, which we kind of talked about there.
yeah.
But I've discovered that God is helping me to find my way, and I'm appreciative to be able to set our own calendar, set our daily schedule, choose our own methods, and be the final decision maker. So much so that I've actually been overwhelmed in the past several weeks, not by stress, but by this unexpected, glorious feeling of freedom. And so, yeah.
Mm. Those were so beautiful. I love that reflection because even when you're talking about the field trips, I was thinking how like sometimes I take my kids out and they're, you see the big school bus and I'm like, as beautiful as this experience should be, it can be such uh nerve-wracking experience because you're trying to keep 40 children alive. Like my
Hmm.
goal is to make sure that I return 40 kids to, so I can just
Yes.
imagine what it's like for teachers who are, they want to go to the science center and it should be like, oh, look over here, look at this. Let's relate it to class. And it's just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Yes.
7, like
I'm telling you, it's for real, for real.
not even
Yes.
experiencing it. But one thing you mentioned was like sitting on the couch reading stories. And that was such a big shift for me because I remember when my kids came home because they were also in private Christian school. And before that, my oldest one was in public school.
Mm.
I would say, okay, let's do this. And they would hop on the couch. And I'm like, no, this is school. We sit at the desk. And I'm like, I pulled them out of school. So why am I recreating school in my house? And I remember going on a curriculum's website and it said couch subjects. I'm like, couch subjects? Who does subjects on the couch? Oh, I didn't tell you this. You're a nurse. I'm also Jamaican. I was going to tell
Oh,
you after you shared about your nurse, I was gonna tell you I'm Jamaican too, but like in our school system, no one does school on the couch. You don't do school on the floor. You sit at your desk and you sit up straight. So those were things that I had to unlearn because
yes.
does learning always or only happen at a desk? No, right? So if the
Mhm.
kid is on the couch and they're reading, that is okay. And
Yeah.
it's the double benefit of your bonding with them. Maybe you're snuggled up under a blanket, maybe you're drinking some hot chocolate as you're reading, right? So
Mhm.
I thought that
Mhm.
was a great reflection. Um, so thank you for sharing that. I do
Yeah.
have one more question for you.
Okay.
If you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? Or as you're reflecting on what you did, what would you tell a new mom, which you probably have to do all the time working for HSLDA? What would you tell a new homeschooler, or what would you do differently, or both?
Well, I don't know about doing differently. I think one thing that comes to mind about doing differently, and I'm kind of telling on myself again, going back, always worrying about money, But I think sometimes I was cutting corners. For instance, I took advantage of like a free download for a curriculum one year. And in the end, and I tell people this all the time, just spend the money and get it printed because
Mm,
it's such a time saver. I lost a lot of time and frustration. Like I would be all ready and I was like, oh, I forgot to print that out, and I have to go back
yeah,
and it was just, yeah, that's one really practical thing. The other thing, I don't know that I would really do a lot of things differently.
that's a good
It's
feeling.
it's been interesting, as my oldest is 15, almost 16 now, and she and I just got to talk a couple of days ago. We were just taking a walk together, and she said, Mom, I had an idyllic childhood. Like when she looked back,
Mhm.
she was, and I thought I was really intentional. Like I knew I wanted to give them lots of experiences.
Yeah,
We were outside. I did try to do for them all the things that I wish that I could have done as a classroom teacher.
yeah.
I didn't do it perfectly, but I don't think we need to do it perfectly. Our kids
Mhm.
roll with the punches and we're all, in on a journey and it's okay. Um yeah, I think I probably as they got older, I could have been maybe more organized about, some things and given them a little bit more structure because I was a little bit more loosey goosey and going with their interest at times. I think sometimes they craved more structure
Structure.
and yeah, than what maybe I gave them. Um, but yeah, I hope that helps. That's kind of I don't really have any regrets,
I
really.
love that. I think that's so beautiful. That's such a good place to be in where you're not like, what if, or maybe I should have. So I think that's really beautiful. I'm going to do a quick reflection. And then if you have final thoughts or you want to add on to anything, then
Okay.
you let me know. Because for anyone who's listening, I hope they either are taking copious notes or they listen to this over and over and over because I'm still on this journey. My boys are 7 and 9, and I just had a baby. So I have a 10-month-old. So I'm
Oh.
going to do it all over again. Real funny story. When I found out that I was pregnant, one of the first things I thought was, I have to teach another child how to read. Like not anything else. That was like one of the first thoughts that came to my head. But the reason I mentioned that is because there's so much that you shared that I'm taking notes and I'm like, oh, I need to do that, or oh, I need to share this because again, you talked about not having to do it all. So whether that means joining a community, joining a co-op, or creating a community or creating a co-op, delegating, prioritizing, those are such practical ways to simplify your journey. You talked about like the list. If you're not a person who lives by the list, then making sure that you know what's priority. But if you are a person who lives by the list, making sure that it's realistic,
Hmm.
setting the tone, being that source of peace in your home and not creating the chaos, being transparent and vulnerable, just sharing, hey, I really have this need, or I would love if XYZ happened. What do you think about this? Just being open and creating that community. You talked about a little bit about the guilt, and that's one gift from the enemy that we don't need to receive.
Hmm.
So I would just like reject that guilt and understand for anyone who feels the guilt, it's kind of normal, but we shouldn't normalize it, right? So
Hmm.
just push
Hmm.
back on it.
Yes.
That getting the things printed, I was like, oh my gosh, bro. Because I'm always like, I always have a list that prints at the library or like prints at home. And you're right. Sometimes you're like, you finally took the time to plan, you're not winging today, and you're like, where's the worksheet? Oh man, I left it on the printer. Or how did it not make it to the binder? And then it creates so much clutter. So
Hmm.
I literally just bought, I had all these worksheets that were printed and they were beautifully put in like sheet protectors and then
Oh
like the
yeah.
binder opens so then they're all over the place. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna spend the money. And it was $30. And I'm like, I was there printing every other week, trying to like meet the minimum. Like this library has 20 pages free, and then like I have enough printer ink. And I'm like, for
Yeah.
$30 for the whole year,
Get it done.
I think that was worth it. And I didn't even look at it before because I'm kind of eclectic. So I was pulling from different curriculum, pulling from different resources. And while
Hmm.
that's good to fill the interest and the needs, it creates a lot of clutter and it makes it more complex. So,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
then one thing you talked about, which I love, and I just have to illuminate is you don't need to do it perfectly. Like God did not call us to perfectly homeschool and raise these children. He called us and commanded us to love them and to
Yes.
grow with them and to live with them. So what are your final thoughts and any other reflections you want to share?
Well, I'll just share it. This isn't really homeschooling, but something that's been on my heart recently. I read the scripture that said we are his masterpiece, created to
Mm,
do great, those works in Christ. And when I heard that, which I've heard that scripture many, many times, it just hit me. I think sometimes we think I'm going to do, and God will look down and he'll say, "Oh, there's a masterpiece." No, but that's not how it is. He
yeah.
takes us where we're at and he's like, "You're my masterpiece. And now
Yeah.
you're equipped to do what I want you to do." And I mean, I don't have time to tell you like all my mistakes that I made, but I did try every day to just realize that I'm doing what I'm doing as unto the Lord.
Yeah.
And I tried to walk in humility with my kids when I made mistakes, or I lost my temper, or I was overly stressed, or whatever it was. And we just grew together. And so I'm still learning, and I think we all are, that we are his masterpiece first, and then that is what equips us to go on. We're not striving to try to become something in his
Mhm.
eyes. We're already, he
We
sees
already
us.
are.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. That is so beautiful. It reminds me of God does not call the equipped, he equips the called.
Yes.
And I think it's just so beautiful the way you share that. But just like my 2000 emails, I will keep you on for the rest of the month. So I am going to let you go. But thank you so much, Krista Winn, HSLDA. Amazing. This was more beneficial, more beautiful, more impactful than I could have ever imagined, asked, or dreamed. So thank you so much for sharing
Aw.
all your wisdom, all your thoughts, Krista.
Thank you for the opportunity. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I needed this today, so thank you, Ro. God bless
It's
you
my
guys.
pleasure. Thank you
Hmm.
so much. God bless
Uh-huh.
you.
Uh-huh. Bye.